Today on the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast, episode 132, we have messaging expert Jim Karrh. Jim's going to be talking to you all about how you can develop a great message, the aspects of it, and when you know you messed up, how you can go about fixing it. All right, folks, welcome to the show. Let's do this.
Welcome to this episode of Moving Forward Leadership. Stick around and learn how to achieve, excel, and become a leader that people willingly follow. Lead, don't boss. And now, here's the host of our show, Chief Leadership Officer, Scott McCarthy.
Welcome one, welcome all. It is your Chief Leadership Officer, Scott McCarthy, and thanks for coming out to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast. It's so great to have you here, where we talk about the three domains of leadership. That is leading yourself, leading your team, and leading your organization. And today we're going to be talking about talking and how you can ensure your message is clear, understood, and basically gets to where it needs to go. And essentially, that's going to cover all three domains because that is so important. Messaging and talking is so important, hence why it touches all three domains. So before we dive in, let's talk a little bit about Jim, shall we? He helps organizations turn their everyday business messaging into consistent business advantage. He guides professionals, teams, entire organizations to stand out through better messaging, which, you know what that does? It turns around better relationships with their customers, their suppliers, their partners, stronger brands, which all boils down to better opportunities. And that's what you want as a leader. You're always looking for a new opportunity to grow, to expand, to develop, to inspire, etc. As a consultant coach, Jim, he served clients on 3 continents, including associations, small businesses, high growth tech firms, some of the largest martial arts organizations, dozens of members of the Fortune 500. This guy knows what he's talking about, hence why he's here on the show. So it's so great to have Jim with all of his experience, and we're going to couple him with me and my military experience, bring you this great show all about messaging. So why don't we say that's enough for now? Let's get to the good, shall we? So sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Jim Karrh about manage the message. Jim, welcome to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast. So good to have you here today.
Well, Scott, it's a pleasure. I appreciate what you're doing in terms of studying leadership and helping people develop their own leadership. I feel like I'm talking to a great group of listeners right now, people who want to be more effective.
Absolutely. It's as you said before, it's a bit of a labor of love, right? And here, Moving Forward Leadership, I came to the realization and developed the mantra that we focus on leadership on 3 domains, and that is leading yourself, how you can be a better leader, leading your team, i.e., how do you take care of the individual employees or people within your organization, and then finally, the leading your organization. How can you take care of that entity, right? That organization entity itself, and make that better. And today we're going to be talking about messaging. So a little bit of all the above, I would venture to say, because
it's all wrapped together in
it's
a messy
all wrapped
picture.
up. Yeah. Absolutely. So, before we dive into the nuts and bolts of the conversation, I'd like to know where the inspiration for you and talking about how to manage the message when leaders are up there talking to their people, dealing with clients, talking about, talking to other organizations, trying to work, potential partnerships and stuff like this. Where did that come from for you?
It's been a progression for me, Scott, all the way from as a young man in my 20s of being an entrepreneur, or really small business owner, as I'd say, an unfortunately small business owner. I've also spent time as a professor and researcher studying consumers and audiences and what they respond to and what they don't respond to. I've been a chief marketing officer for a mid-sized private company, so applying a lot of those ideas in practice. And for a little more than the last decade, I've been working with leaders and their teams and their entire enterprises on this whole notion about how do you talk about the business in a consistent way, and get a lot of other people to do the same. And what I found over time, Scott, in these different experiences, is there's some simple guidelines that you can follow to be far more effective. And I continue to see this is a chronic business issue. It's a chronic limit to your personal effectiveness as a leader, and it's a tough, frustrating roadblock for a lot of leaders in trying to grow the business and equip their teams. So all of the things that you mentioned there, the different forms of leadership, this is one of the things that tends to get in the way. The inspiration from it, Scott, as I looked at the different elements that go through, the things that I've learned about what's the right sort of message itself, and how do you manage people and get them equipped and confident in this setting as well, and be able to talk about the business. And then as a manager, as a leader, what are some habits, things that you can bake into the culture of how people meet and train and are motivated and acknowledged to make this a more permanent way that you do business. Taking all of that together, I look at this, Scott, and listeners, and say this is a point of frustration and a problem for many, many leaders, but it's manageable. It's just not mysterious. It's not, oh, you have to be a trained communicator. You don't have to be of a certain personality type, as we can talk about. You don't necessarily need to be an extrovert, for example. These are in the same way that you would manage operations or manage finance or manage other areas, manage talent within your organization, within your team, you can manage the message. The great news also, Scott, is that you don't have to be perfect. Thank goodness, because none of us say exactly the right thing or ask the right question or tell the right story at the right time. You can always think of it later as, oh, I wish I could have done that a little bit better. But you don't have to be perfect. If you and your team and your company can have just consistent good practices on this, you really will stand out.
There's so many good points in there for sure. And yeah, the idea of perfection doesn't exist here at Moving Forward Leadership. There is no such thing as perfect. There is no such thing as a perfect plan. There is no such thing as the perfect message. There's no such thing as perfect, period. You can't be a perfect leader because everybody interprets all those things differently. Into what's perfect to me is completely different to what's perfect to you and what's perfect to the listener. So we definitely talk about that. And on the idea of being imperfect, I always like to give the listeners an idea of, what are the key pitfalls, mistakes that we're making that we may not be aware of, right? So, when leaders are out there trying to spread their message, from your standpoint, what are the key mistakes that are common across the board that are happening? So the listener can go, yeah, I do that. Oh yeah, I definitely do that one. Not too bad on this one, but I definitely do the others.
Well, there are a few common ones that I see. And again, they're all correctable, Scott. So just as quick background, what I've found, and if you want a simple structure or a simple visual to carry in your head. So what is it that tends to make a person, a professional, but particularly a team or an entire organization good at this, consistently good at it, even if not perfect, again, is that they manage to bring together a message that can resonate. So the message itself is crafted in a way that that works. It's memorable, it's shareable, it's interesting. The second leg of the three-legged stool are the people themselves. I call them the messengers. So who's your fan base? Who's your employee base, your sales team, your friends in the community, whoever that may be, the people whom you want to also be talking about your business and who are probably willing to help you and willing to recommend you. They might not know what to say, or they may forget about you right in the moment. The third leg of the stool are the management habits. So what are the things that you can do on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis to try to keep this smooth and consistent and fresh? So your question is about where are the pitfalls. I find there to be some particular pitfalls or maybe some wrong assumptions in each of those three areas. The main one that the first pops to mind And this is a function of our brains, Scott. It's just the way that we're wired. It has to do with the message. And the number one pitfall is we tend to talk about ourselves too much. There's some brain science behind that. The parts of our brains that signal pleasure to us, they light up when we talk about ourselves in the same way as if you have a great meal. Our brain, when we talk about ourselves, it's comfortable and our brains light up and say, hey, nice job, mouth. You did exactly what you're supposed to be doing. But as a leader and as someone trying to grow a business or grow an enterprise, grow your influence, I think we all know deep down inside it's not about us, or it should not be about us. But that tends to be the default. It tends to be what we're working on. It tends to be our products, our services, our experience, our expertise. So knowing that is the pitfall, that's where you have to have a little bit of structure, a buddy system, some guidance to make sure that your website, your personal conversations, your social media isn't too much about yourself. By the way, social media, studies of the messages in social media, about 80% of it is self-focused. So it gets a little tiresome. We can do things and have a message that's more toward the people whom we help. Just quickly, I think the other things, the other two areas where we tend to get pitfalls, when it comes to the messengers, like other people whom we want to equip and inspire to talk about us, we tend to underestimate their capabilities and make some assumptions. For example, the study within the past decade, which was very surprising to many. I was a bit surprised, frankly. It studied salespeople and had also given them some personality tests ahead of time. It studied their actual performance. And they were looking at whether you were an extrovert or an introvert or somewhere in the middle of how effective you were. Now, Scott, I'd had the assumption for a long time, and I think we've been told that extroverts are the best salespeople. They're the ones who are going to get out there. They're bulletproof. If they've been told no 100 times, they're going to try 101 times. And they're not afraid to go into a networking event or talk about what's going on in the business. As it turns out, extroverts and introverts are equally effective at sales. But it's actually the people in the middle, whom the researchers call ambiverts, are the most effective. They tend to be, depending on the situation, sometimes they're talking, sometimes they're listening. They're wired well for the back and forth of conversation. Here's the thing as it applies to leadership. Most people are somewhere in the middle. I call them the nimble majority because they're well wired for great conversation. All you have to do as a leader, whether it be for yourself or your team, is figure how to plug into that. And you may have some people on your team that are more introverted, some are more extroverted. They have their own skills and their own comfort levels too. But recognize that most of the people in and around your business are perfectly well wired to talk about you and to engage in really good business conversations. You just have to be able to equip them for that. Finally, real quickly, when it comes to the pitfalls, I think as managers, we tend to fall into, I'd say, assumptions, baggage, mantras that may not apply. So, for example, Scott, how many times have we heard you can't over communicate?
Oh,
right? You hear that all the time. Sure, you can. You can say the wrong thing too often and over communicate, or you can say the same thing through the same channel over and over and over. And at that point, you become a nag and people will tune you out. So I think just approaching the management part as a human, think about your own experience working inside organizations, experience as a consumer. How do you equip people? How do you acknowledge them? And how do you give them some practice and confidence as you go along? So it really gets, Scott, all the way from our assumptions to our brains to our history and our baggage bringing into this. There's some pitfalls there. And that's why it seems really hard for a lot of leaders to feel like that they can get the message out there and rally people around it. But for each of these, as we talked about before, they are manageable. They are addressable. These are things you can do as a manager, as a leader, and become really, make this a competency rather than a source of frustration.
No, there are so many good things in there. And I found myself each time going, Yep, I've recognized those. I recognize this. I've done that, or I've seen that done many times, right? And
And
as you
Scott,
said,
I've done it in my own businesses. We all fall victim to it, but these things have just arisen over time and working with. By now, I kind of lost track of the numbers, but it's well more than 20,000 working professionals and executives and teams of putting their messages out into their marketplaces, and so the patterns tend to. Whereas the details may be different from organization to organization or industry to industry, these general patterns are pretty robust. So it's if you're nodding your head and you think, oh yeah, I see that all the time. Maybe I do that all the time. You're in fine company. And here's the thing that also to wrestle with. I find that the people who know the most and oftentimes have the most passion behind what they're doing are the most susceptible to this, especially the part about talking about ourselves, because we really know that we can help people. We want to grow. We want to serve. And sometimes we just let that get ahead of ourselves.
especially for entrepreneurs, right? Then there's a lot of entrepreneurs who listen to this show, and I've coached a number of entrepreneurs, and they go into that pitfall mainly because they have been literally the business from its inception, right? They've been the face, they've been the CX everything for the business, and now all of a sudden it's taking off, it's grabbed traction, and now they find themselves trying to push more messages out to their new employees, to their new team members, the partners that they're bringing on board. And it's all about, well, me, I did this. And then all of a sudden they're like, well, time out. It's not about you anymore. It's about everybody. And you are not just the business anymore. The business is the business, or the organization is the organization, right? So no, so many great things.
That's right. And it's a tough separation. You probably dealt with this with your clients as well. How much of our own personal identity is wrapped up in the success or thereof in their business baby, in their idea, in their company. And so it is an area where sometimes a coach and some guidance and some peers can help you with that. And when it comes strictly to the messaging part, so again, whether your audience is potential investors or potential customers or others who can recommend you, you really have to change your focus and make it look outward rather than inward so much. If you're having a frustration of, I get it, why don't they, whoever they are, may even be your own employees, then time to take a deep breath and think, okay, from their perspective, why would I get it? In other words, do I know all the things I need to know? Do I have I practiced the skill at it? Do I understand the how? Have I seen you as the leader model good behavior? So, which will give me confidence of this is something that I can do as well. So you got to re-engineer that whole relationship and think, how can these people inside and outside the organization whom I want to be messengers, how do I feed them? How do I give them the knowledge, the skills, and the confidence in order to be able to do that?
That's a great segue. So what are some of the best ways to, empower your people, train them, give them the right message so that they take the message and move it forward to the outside, whether that's, other employees within an organization or partners, business partners, potential clients, etc.
Sure. A few things, some practical ideas and a perspective that might help a bit here, Scott. Let me begin by going back to the point we talked about just a few minutes ago. So first of all, recognize that most of the people whom you would want to help share your message, again, inside and outside the business, are already equipped to be able to do that, right? So just in their own business and personal lives, they're fine, right? You probably don't have to fix them. You just need to feed them. So what is it that you can feed them? One of the pitfalls that I find is that a lot of people, and this is really applied primarily to sales and marketing, but you can think of other ways that it applies too. But if you want other people to be able to talk about what it is that you do and the benefits that you have and what makes you different than competitors, then you need to break that knowledge down into bite-sized bits. In other words, most of the time people are trained. They may be trained tactically in some areas like, here's how to use good language. Here's how to write well, or here's how to make eye contact, or here's how to do this or that. Or they get a bunch of product knowledge or company knowledge, something along those lines. But that doesn't really lend itself to conversation. So think about, what is it that people can remember, that they believe, they feel is authentic and real and shareable. So I oftentimes, if I'm working with a corporate client or an organizational client, we'll put together a conversational guide or a playbook, not a script. That's going into the wrong direction. People will rebel against something that feels overly scripted. But some talking points, some stories, questions to ask in certain situations. So you need to be able to package the knowledge. Most people know too much, or they know too much of the wrong things, or it's there and they can't think of it in the moment. So the first thing is to figure out, what is it that you would want people to talk about, or where they would recognize organically a good time to bring it up. As a side note, but an important side note, Scott, it is my considered opinion, research and practice, that your mission or vision statement is a lousy guide to conversation. Frankly, most people don't care. And here's the other thing. Studies of hundreds of these mission or vision statements, there are about a dozen words that are in almost every vision or mission statement. Everyone talks about service and community and sustainability and inclusiveness and customer. So if everyone's saying the same thing, everyone appears to be the same. It doesn't differentiate you. So don't assume that everybody just needs to spout your vision or mission. That actually won't help you. It's not that interesting and it's not that differentiated. So packaging the knowledge, the things that you would want people to talk about and say, is the first step, and doing it in a way that, again, is oriented around other people, the people whom you serve, who is it that makes a great customer, a great member of your organization? Who do you help the most, and what are the benefits they get out of it? Those are the things that people need to be well versed in, and some stories behind that. People react well to stories. There are probably lots of stories hiding in your own organization. People know their own stuff. They might not know the stories that and customer examples and things that have happened in other parts of the organization. As a leader, either yourself or get someone to help curate this, package it, and involve lots of other people in the organization and what's going to go into that playbook or that messaging guide. One other leadership piece about this, Scott, is when you're going to bring a new message out, a lot of people will, inside the organization particularly, might look at that and say, oh, okay, this is what the boss wants us to say. And that really won't happen. Or they may say, oh, yeah, this has come out of marketing. I think marketing did this. Or some agency or some consultant, somebody else, and say, your best people especially will look at that and think, well, if I didn't contribute to it, and it's not the way that I would say it, I'm just not going to do it. So as a leader, as a way to both build momentum for this new message, and also a way to make the message itself better, is I always guide clients to, let's involve people from marketing and sales and finance and distribution and all sorts of different areas that have different experiences and perspectives. It will be more real. The words and the stories and the questions will come out. They'll be better because it will reflect the way that people inside and outside your organization really talk and really think. And the process of putting that together will also build a little energy, a little credibility inside the organization. So when you do roll this out to everyone and say, here's how we want to talk about the business, they'll go, yeah, I helped work on that. Or Charlie, who works, next to me over there, yeah, he was kind of representing our group. So we feel like we have our fingerprints on it. It doesn't feel made up. It doesn't feel inauthentic or, too scripty or salesy. It's more real that way. So I would say the guidelines are, think about what are the most important elements that people need to know, and make sure and recognize that they're well equipped to be able to do this, and then involve a good cross section of people who have a good perspective and can help build momentum for this whole effort.
Sometimes you have goals, but you know what? You have a hard time reaching them, and you just can't figure out why. Why is it that you can't achieve those things that you want to achieve? Maybe it's dedication. Maybe it's motivation. Maybe you haven't picked the right goals. So this is where I was not too long ago. And then I realized something. I've been developing the Power Goals program my entire life. And here it is now for you, where you can learn how to pick the right goals, figure out how to achieve those goals, how to stay on track, but most importantly, how to get back on track when you get off. So are you ready? Are ready to up your game and achieve those things that you've been meaning to achieve for so long now? Simply go to movingforwardleadership.com/power and learn more about the Power Goals program and achieve everything that you've been wanting to achieve. And now, back to the show. I love that, and all of a sudden I feel validated because I'm not a person who runs a script whenever I speak in front of a group or run a meeting or whatever, whenever I'm communicating messaging. I have my talking points, but they're points, they're bullet points. I have my ideas, but I'm not a script runner. And I feel that when we run to a script, we kind of put ourselves in a box. And all of a sudden you don't feel like, oh, I feel like I can't get out of that box, even though it would be nice to get out of the box because I got the box and I'm stuck in the box, but they're not in the box with me. So that's why I've gotten rid of the box, i.e. the script. And I totally agree with you, especially on the sales side. Is like, oh, here comes this sleazy sales pitch. By having a conversation with someone, establishing that rapport, that relationship, and in one way or another going, how can I help you? How can I be a service to you? These are the things that I have because you've just heard all the stories and the messaging and all that behind. But how can I, as the middle person between you and these, how can we connect, right? And I feel when we're stuck in that box and we're stuck with that script, that we can't really, it's harder to do that. And the last point that you made of doing an all-inclusive team, bringing everybody together so it's a coherent message, I think it's so crucial. It's so crucial that the whole organization goes as one entity, marketing or finance and operations and sales, everything gets disjointed, and you can't lead like that.
I completely agree, Scott. Your reaction in terms of how you react to a script is very common, and especially, again, among the high performers in your organization, the people who you really want to be the adopters of all this and model it. They have a comfort level that needs to be respected as well. So involve them in it. And I do find that it's much easier to remember talking points. Sometimes we'll have a picture, a little visual. So that somebody could put on a whiteboard or that you just keep in their head. They could put on an infographic. But you don't have a script for this podcast, but you have a plan, right? So saying that you don't need a script is not saying we don't want to plan. You're not going to wing it, because that never works. Winging it never works. You won't remember the right things to say. You'll be thinking so much about what do I say that you won't be in the conversation. You won't be in the moment at the time. And so there's a nice middle between winging it and again, which doesn't work, or overly scripting it. And whether you're just in a conversation, a presentation, a business meeting, a speech, if it's overly scripted, I find most people are too worried about trying to remember what they're supposed to say rather than being able to naturally respond. So planning is having an idea of where the conversation should go, how you can help, and as you say, some talking points, a story or two, a visual, something that'll help you lead that conversation, but still be in the conversation in the moment. And so that's where the value of a playbook or a guide and some good coaching and practice and social support inside the company as well. That's another thing is leadership advice, people will look to you as the leader, that you know what it is they should be talking about. You model it. So they want to see you do it, right? Even if you don't do it perfectly. In fact, especially if you don't do it perfectly, that'll let them know that's okay. And then you've got to show people how to do it, right? So it's good coaching, it's reinforcement, and letting them know that, hey, if they're, as long as they're not lying to people or getting you in trouble, then it's okay if we kind of stumble around just a little bit at the beginning. We'll all get better together. This is where we're going to go. No one's going to get whacked for giving it a good try and supporting their colleagues.
But at the same time, you can use that to its advantage, right? Doing a little stumble can add humor to the conversation or the presentation, whatever. Build that rapport, break the ice. All of a sudden, people have a story that they remember you by, and then all of a sudden they're coming up, hey, remember that time? And they're like, yeah. Oh, by the way, what were you talking about? Oh, I was talking about the service that we had. Blah 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 blah. And all of a sudden, you can gear it that way. So I think that, what we need to, as leaders, is look at the advantage side to any situation, right? And not necessarily just focus on the disadvantage side. Yes, they stumbled, so work on whatever fault occurred, but at the same time, look at it and go, you know what, there is an advantage to this if, down the line, potentially.
I agree. I have a chapter in my book about what I call mangled messages. And a lot of them are just funny, a little cringeworthy, of where companies have either said the wrong thing or just stumbled about themselves, or they've been too self-important, or whatever the case might be. But also, and we can look at these and again know that that's avoidable. The big problems are avoidable. Don't worry about it.
Right.
The larger point, Scott, and for your listeners, is don't worry so much about that it might go wrong, as in the huge benefits, which are 10 times greater, of just being in the game. Because what happens for most of us is, if we don't know what to say, or we feel vulnerable, or that it's risky to say things, we won't say anything at all, which means that people aren't going to be interacting with customers or prospects or their friends. And it means that you would not be taking advantage of the networks of everybody inside your organization and the networks of your current customers or clients and friends in the community. This can be a huge engine. Again, don't worry about perfection. Just remember, try to keep aligned your message, your messengers, and your everyday management habits. It won't be perfect, but if you can bring those things together, then you will have a tremendous advantage. Just be in the game, and I find that the X factor of confidence tends to be a separator as well. People are confident in what they offer, in how to express it, and that this will ultimately be a good thing if they're in those conversations.
So in a similar vein, we were just talking about, messages that, we make mistakes and stuff like this. But sometimes there are messages that get completely wrecked. And they could, the messenger just completely drops the ball and says something, does something, interacts in a way that is like, that is not on. That is not right. That's wrong. The way you said it was wrong. The words that you used were horrible. You are now tarnished our reputation, blah, blah, blah. How can leaders basically recover from this type of situation to hopefully not come across as trying to be too sleazy and, we're going to cover this up, but take that wrecked message and turn it into the way that it was meant to be in the first place?
Well, in terms of how to recover, and I think in most cases when there's a mistake like this, there's not a bad intention, but there's a terrible execution. Or maybe people are moving too quickly, or they react emotionally, whatever that case may be. In general, when that happens, you need to, as we see it time and time again, own up to the problem, right? Address people. Here's why it happened. Here's how we're going to fix it. And then later on, we'll come back to you and let you know that we did fix it and we've learned from it. So just not trying to hide it or this or that. I gave I have a couple of examples in my book as well. Here's one that real quickly for you and your audience. There's a very solid university here in the States called Drake University. It's in Iowa. Have a lot of high ranked programs. they were trying to have a new recruiting campaign. So they wanted to reach out to high school seniors who were considering lots of different universities and speak in a more, modern, hip language and basically be cool. So they had done with a marketing agency, a research firm, and they've been tested some different ad campaigns and different slogans and things that they can have, and they wanted something that would get the attention of high school seniors. When we talked earlier, Scott, about making sure that you involve people from around your organization before you kind of go forward with a message, the Drake University leadership did not do that. So it was just this research firm and an online sample of high school seniors, and they came up with this great idea. Here it is. It was the Drake Advantage. And so their big visual for this on their ads were D, the letter D plus. So it was D for Drake, and then plus is the advantage. There's all the great things that you get from it. And because they had research that's saying that high school seniors would pay attention to that. Okay. Think about what D plus means for a university or a school of any part. Not what you want, right? So they roll this deal out, and listeners, I'm watching Scott laugh here on all this. So he had the immediate, the same as you. What, a university put out D plus as their promotion? And so as it turns out, they did not ask faculty, staff, alumni, other stakeholders, someone who could point out to them, D plus, not what we want to say about our university. So they owned up to it. As it turns out, they said, look, we really messed up here because we went forward with this. We had this right intention. We wanted to stand out and have a different message than what high school seniors were accustomed to seeing from a university. But what we should have done is gone to all of our stakeholders and all the people who could have helped us with this and gotten your opinion as well. So they reconstituted and it was okay. It was a lesson learned. So yes, these things do happen. They're, again, not typically bad intentions. It's just bad execution or someone thinking, oh, I've got this. I don't need to ask anybody else about it.
I literally have tears in my eyes, just for the listener who can't see me. Jim's having a good chuckle himself at me laughing. But yeah, that's absolute horrible execution right there. But a great story to put the point home. And yeah, just owning up to it, I think basically helps, reestablish your credibility, right? Reestablish that rapport. And yeah, we messed up. Show a little bit of vulnerability, transparency, which are great things. And unfortunately, a lot of leaders out there, no, not leaders, bosses, because our tagline here at Moving Forward Leadership is lead, don't boss.
Lead, don't boss.
Right? So a lot of bosses out there don't think those are great traits or things to do, and they think they show weakness. But the reality is they actually show strength, that you're comfortable in your own skin per se, that you can admit to your faults to the large masses, and you're going to be accountable to yourself and make the changes required to be better down the line. And what more can you ask? That is actual perfection right there. The imperfection. It is. Right?
And it's showing your humanity and the good human traits as a leader. As a brief side note, I would say when things go wrong in a public way like this, don't give the non-apology apology. We see it all the time with people, especially on social media, and they say the wrong thing, and then they'll come back with, if you took offense, then I'm sorry. Or I'm sorry if there was any blah, blah. So they're basically putting the responsibility on other people if they were affected. The way to do it is say, I messed up. I wasn't trying to. This is what I was trying to do, or to say, I said the wrong thing. I did the wrong thing. I didn't ask the right people. Here's how I'm fixing it. Here's how I'm accountable. I'll report back to you. I'll let you know how your input changed what we were doing so this problem won't happen again. Just do it. Just own it.
Awesome. No, that's great advice for sure. Jim, man, this has been a super stellar conversation, and I'm kind of sad that I kind of have to wind it down here now, but unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. But before I close out, I got a couple last questions for you. And the first being a question I asked all the guests here at Moving Forward Leadership. And as according to you, Jim Karrh, what makes a great leader? I
fall back on something that John C. Maxwell said a while back. And he has 10,000 great leadership sayings, but I think they apply very well, especially to this area about telling your story and having a leadership message. Maxwell's quote is, "A leader is one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way." So basically, knowing the way is, I've got it. We got the vision, we got the strategy, we know what we need to do. Go the way is modeling the behavior. Again, people will pay a lot more attention oftentimes to what you do than to what you say you should do. And so you got to model it as even as imperfect as it might be. And that can work to your advantage. And then finally, show the way means giving people the how. Like, here's how you can do that. Here's how you can, in your conversations, in your training, in your meetings, when you're out there with customers. You won't do it exactly the way that I, as the leader, will do it, but here are the skills and the tools and the practice and all of that, the resources, so you can do it as well in your own way. So that, I think, it's not just having the vision and the plan, and it's not just modeling the behavior, but it's also helping other people to be able to behave and bring about the change that they want as well.
Awesome. Love it. Couldn't agree more. And finally, how can people find you? How can they follow you? Feel free to give your book a shameless plug. It's all about you right now.
No shame here at all. So it's been a pleasure to be here. And I assume, Scott, if you can put in the show notes, the toughest thing here is the spelling of my last name, which is Karrh. It's pronounced Karrh. It's my own branding. I'm just sticking with it. So if you can get that right, I own Google. Like 10 pages. I have on my website, jimkarrh.com, a number of resources for you and some free stuff that you might find helpful. I have a podcast. These podcasts are great, Scott. It's wonderful. Mine is called the Manage Your Message podcast. I'd invite people to add that into their portfolio. And my book is called The Science of Customer Connections, Manage Your Message to Grow Your Business. You can find it in all the usual places, and there's an audio version as well. So all the way from Amazon to Audible and everything in between. It's a guide. I set it out really practically and simply for putting together as a leader the messengers in your management habits, and a lot of good examples, anecdotes, and bits of research and science that will bring it all together for you if you want to tackle this on your own. It is, I would just encourage everyone to say, this is probably for most leaders and most teams and organizations, this is the most direct, quickest way to grow your business. You don't have to change your pricing or your product or your distribution or the people inside your company necessarily, just the way that people talk about it on a consistent basis. And in pretty short order, you can get back to the growth that you really want.
Awesome. And for you, the listeners, always, it's easy. Just go to movingforwardleadership.com/132. Links are in the show notes. Jim, again, thanks for coming out. Thanks for talking to me. But most importantly, thanks to talking to the listeners out there.
My pleasure, Scott. Thank you.
All right, that's all I got for you fine folks today. I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you enjoyed the interview. And most importantly, I hope you got something out of it. And if you did, remember, R², S², right? Rate and review the show so that it gets a little bit noticed, a bit more. But most importantly, I can help more people, because that's what I'm here for. That's what my guests are here for, is to help more people become better leaders and not being bosses, right? So remember that. R², rate and review. S, share the show. Share this show with someone who you think can relate to the podcast as a whole and today's topic. And then finally, subscribe. Subscribe so that you never miss another episode. And you can do that via your podcast playing app of choice through movingforwardleadership.com/subscribe. That's it for today, ladies and gentlemen. And as always, stop bossing and start leading. Take care now.